Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Londa Nwadike and I am a state extension food safety specialist for both Kansas State University and the University of Missouri Extension. And today I'm going to be talking about vacuum and reduced oxygen packaging for retail food establishments. And I'll just say vacuum packaging is a type of reduced oxygen packaging. It's probably the term that's more commonly known, I think, at least for me it is. So I included that title or that term in the title to help explain that. Oops. There we go. So today I'll be talking just briefly here this morning about first the benefits of reduced oxygen packaging for retail food service. So retail food establishments. So, and I think I have another slide that talks about what retail food establishment means, but it's like restaurants and grocery stores and those sort of entities that might be selling food directly to the consumer. So so this presentation will not include information for food processors that are selling to another business, but this is focused on food establishments that are selling to the consumer. So we're talking about the benefits of reduced oxygen packaging for retail food establishments. I'll talk a little bit about the different types of reduced oxygen packaging. So vacuum packaging is one of those types, and there's some others too. Then I'll talk about the food safety concerns with this type of packaging, and then the barriers that need to be included to ensure the safety of reduced oxygen packaging products. We'll also talk about the regulations for retail food establishments. I'll specifically be talking about the regulations for Kansas, but most of those regulations would apply in any locality. So, but I'll talk more about that. And then I'll share a few useful resources as well. So this presentation is based on a new publication that we just published, and it's called Vacuum and Reduced Oxygen Packaging. So the link for the URL is available there at the top. So it's available from our K-State Extension bookstore. We're working on making it available through MU Extension as well, since I work for both universities. And I want to be sure to thank the reviewers of the publication. So Karen Blakesley with Kansas State University, Adam Inman with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, so our regulator or regulatory authority in Kansas, and then Dr. Barb Ingham from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Their state extension food safety specialist also reviewed it. So I really appreciate their input to make the document better and more accurate and more understandable for everyone. So that fact sheet is available and hopefully will be a good resource for you, whatever state you're in, whether it's Kansas or another state. The information should still be useful for you if you're interested. If you're a food retail food establishment that is interested in reduced oxygen packaging, vacuum packaging, hopefully it'll be helpful. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of using reduced oxygen packaging. So I'll use that acronym ROP for that. Why do people use reduced oxygen packaging? You'll even hear, people trying to sell it to people to do it at home. So again, this publication and presentation we're just talking about for retail food establishments. But so the reduction or removal of oxygen from food products limits the growth of some of the spoilage organisms. So it really helps to extend shelf life of cold stored foods. So it reduces the so spoilage organisms are ones that cause that off flavor and that off odor. So removing oxygen can help to reduce the growth of some of that. And then also it just helps to reduce the oxidation of foods, rancidity formation and color deterioration. So those are all quality things. So it should help the food to taste better longer. which is, a great thing to help reduce food waste. We don't want to have food waste. So we want to increase, the availability of food, but it has to be safe food is the key. So, we'll go into that in a minute here. But so just to emphasize it may help extend the shelf life of cold stored foods, which is a benefit for reducing food waste. So the different types of reduced oxygen packaging, like I mentioned at the beginning, vacuum packaging is the term that we probably most commonly hear. But so vacuum packaging is one type of reduced oxygen packaging because you're reducing the oxygen in the package. So with vacuum packaging, you're removing the air, and then the bag that it's stored in, or the container that it's stored in, is then sealed to hold out any more oxygen. So it holds in the current mix of gases in the package and then keeps out oxygen. Then there's modified atmosphere packaging. So that's another type of reduced oxygen packaging. So when we think about, the air that we breathe, generally speaking, it's 21% oxygen. So just the typical air, outside is 21% oxygen. When you're using modified atmosphere packaging, you are changing that composition. And so you can add other gases, you can remove some oxygen to add those other gases, and that can help increase the shelf life in different ways. And there's a lot of different people that will do different studies on this, how to store things better, different different compositions of gases to store things as long as possible. So with modified atmosphere packaging, you start with one air composition, and it might change over time. It depends on the permeability of the packaging material and, what food is in that package and how it respires. So, even the different products in this picture would respire differently. So would have different changes in composition over time. Some other types of reduced oxygen packaging you may have heard of is cook, chill, and then sous vide. Sous vide is cooking under pressure. Sous is under in French, and vide is vacuum, I believe. So those are some other types of reduced oxygen packaging, but we won't talk about that more today. So, as I said, there's a lot of benefits to using reduced oxygen packaging, but there's also food safety concerns. So we, again, I think it's very important to increase shelf life and reduce food waste. But if the food that you're producing is not safe, then that's not of value. So, we just have to make sure that the food is as safe as possible from however it's produced. So the thing with reduced oxygen packaging foods is that there's an organism called Clostridium botulinum. So that can cause botulism. So botulism is a nerve toxin that is produced by Clostridium botulinum spores. And so Clostridium botulinum is a big concern in food processing. We want to make sure that we're controlling that because botulism is not a good thing. The thing with most microorganisms that, spoilage organisms, like I said, you can see them, smell them, but things like Clostridium botulinum, you cannot detect it by just normal sight or smell. So I can't see or smell with my nose or my eyes if there's Clostridium botulinum in my food. So Clostridium botulinum spores, they typically grow only in foods that have a higher pH, so above 4.6, and have a higher water activity. So water activity is a combination of the moisture content with the salt and sugar content. So water activity is the amount of water that's available for microorganisms to grow. And so if there's sugar or salt there, that sugar and salt bind up that water and then make it not available for the microorganisms to use to grow. And so so when we have foods that are excuse me, that are more that have a higher pH, so less acidic. So the less acidic foods and the moister foods are going to be the ones where Clostridium botulinum spores can grow. So so we have to think about that when we're thinking about how we're handling food products. Clostridium botulinum is everywhere. It's in the soil and so on. So that's why we really have to be concerned about it. It could be in any food. So so that's our first concern with reduced oxygen packaging products. The second concern that we have is when there's extended shelf life. We've reduced the spoilage organisms. We've we're maintaining the quality, so the product is still should still taste good longer. When you have that longer shelf life, then organisms like, again, Clostridium botulinum, sorry, and then also Listeria monocytogenes, which is another nasty organism that a pathogen that we don't want to consume. Those two organisms can grow slowly over time, even when there's refrigeration temperatures. So, especially if the product is like at 45 degrees or something like that, then botulinum, Clostridium botulinum, and Listeria monocytogenes can keep growing. And, that's not a good thing. So if it's in there a long enough time, it can grow to a level that, can cause problems. So that's why it's very important to keep food at or below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, throughout the entire chain, the time it's produced, stored, even the consumer bringing it home from the grocery store, from the market, and then in the consumer's home. So it's really important to maintain that cold chain throughout. And again, the thing with these longer shelf life foods, because of the reduced oxygen packaging, they might not have off odors or appearances, but they could still have pathogens present. So you don't notice anything. It seems like it's fine, but it could have pathogens present. In typical conditions, if your milk's been sitting in the fridge too long, or if it's been sitting out on the counter too long, it starts to smell. It might start to curdle. And then this isn't so good anymore. Then that's an indication there might be some pathogens present as well as the spoilage organisms. But if there's no spoilage organisms, we don't have that extra kind of hint of there might be a problem here. So, so that's another concern with the reduced oxygen packaging products, food products. Okay, so what can you do to ensure? So we talked about the benefits of reduced oxygen packaging. So what can we do to ensure that it is safe? So, so again, this is the Kansas regulatory requirements, but it's based on the FDA food code. So most states would have these requirements. And I'll talk more about that in a few slides, but so the important thing, again, from a safety perspective, as well as in most cases, a regulatory perspective, reduced oxygen packaged foods must have at least 2 barriers against Clostridium botulinum. So the first thing is that refrigeration is maintained at or less than 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So you definitely want to have that cold chain maintained to make sure that we don't allow for growth of Clostridium botulinum, Listeria monocytogenes, et cetera. You have to make sure that the product, so if you're using refrigeration as one of the barriers, so I should back up, there's, I mentioned you have to have at least 2 of these barriers. So I'm going to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different barriers. You have to have at least 2 of these. So if refrigeration is one of the barriers that you've chosen, then you need to make sure that you're maintaining the temperature at less than 41 or lesser at 41. And then clearly labeling the product with the use by date of less than 30 days after production. So you want to make sure that people aren't keeping it around too long. And then it must be labeled with this important must be kept refrigerated at less than 41, because we want to make sure that, again, the entire chain is keeping this product at less than 41. So if you're going to use refrigeration as one of your barriers, it has to be refrigerated. It has to be less than 41 degrees. Okay, so the second possibility of barriers that you can use for reduced oxygen packaging product safety is having the pH to be less than 4.6. So most fruit products, so your oranges for sure, and a lot of other fruits are going to be acidic. And so then the pH is less than 4.6, and that will be another barrier to Clostridium botulinum and Listeria monocytogenes. They don't like that acidic environment. So and at the end, I have a resources slide, and there's a pH of foods list there from a reputable university. So that's a good resource if you don't know. Things like mangoes are not as acidic. So there's some fruits that are less acidic. So that list can help you with that. So the third barrier that that again you could choose from is having a low water activity. So in this case, the water activity of less than 0.91. So again, water activity is that combination of moisture with the sugar and salt content, and water activity can be measured on a water activity meter. So like Kansas Valley Added Foods Lab or the University of Missouri Extension Food Lab can help with water activity testing, or University of Wisconsin lab. So a lot of universities would be able to provide this testing. So things like hard cheeses are, drier, so they would have a lower water activity. So the fourth example of, or the fourth possibility, I should say, for barriers to ensure reduced oxygen packaging product safety is the presence of high levels of competing organisms. So if you have raw meat, for example, that's just natural that there will be other microorganisms there. That's just totally normal. So if you do have something like raw meat, that is also considered a barrier. It's when you're cooking the meat and you're getting rid of those just normal microorganisms, then that's when you would could have problems. So if you have raw meat, that's a barrier right there itself, but you still have to have one other barrier as well. So the next one, the fifth one, is freezing. So going one step further than refrigeration is freezing. And it is important that all reduced oxygen packaged frozen foods from a retail food establishment must be clearly labeled, important, keep frozen until use. So again, if you're using freezing as one of your barriers, you have to label it accordingly so that people do keep it frozen. And then as a note, seafood must be frozen before, during, and after that reduced oxygen packaging, because there's some extra concerns there. So you really want to make sure that you're monitoring that closely. And then the sixth barrier that we'll talk about is inspected, properly cured meat or poultry products. So and when we talk about curing, in this case, it means that the product must contain salt and nitrate or nitrates. So, and then there's regulations, and this is all listed in the fact sheet that do that prescribe, how this food has to be cured. So again, you have to pick one of these. Sorry, you have to pick two of these 6 barriers to ensure reduced oxygen packaging product safety. So you don't have to do all 6. You don't have to, you don't have to even do 5 or 4 or 3. You have to do 2. So, but you cannot just do one, and there has to be at least 2 of these barriers to kind of, it's like a hurdle approach. We want to do, as many things as we can to reduce the growth of pathogens as much as possible. So have to pick 2 of these 6. So in addition to using at least 2 of those barriers that we talked about on the last slide, you must ensure that your employees are properly trained on reduced oxygen packaging like that. That is very important because your employees have to know what they're doing too, and making sure that they're paying attention, using good hygienic practices, but also that they're making sure things are refrigerated if they're supposed to be, and etc. So that is important too. Okay, so now moving into the regulations side of things. So again, this is based on the Kansas Food Code, but this is based on the FDA Food Code. So most states would use this, but always check with your local public health department or your local jurisdiction to be sure. So yes. So when you're again, in general, most jurisdictions will require you to have those 2 barriers that we talked about. And they'll also require you to have a HACCP plan in place. So HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. So you have to have like a food safety, essentially, plan in place to specify all the different practices that you're using to make sure that the food is as safe as possible. So it's documenting what you're doing. It's you thinking through your process and then documenting what you're doing and then making sure that you're training your and so on these procedures. So so in your HACCP plan, you can see the things listed here. You have to identify what the food is. You have to specify how you're keeping the food below 41 degrees Fahrenheit at or below. So what kind of, are you using a refrigerator, walk-in cooler, or what is it that you're using? Describe how the packages will be prominently labeled. So you have to make sure you include that labeling that we talked about in the previous slides. And making sure that what the shelf life is of the product. So just keeping all that documented is really important. So just continuing what your HACCP plan requires for reduced oxygen packaging products, that you have to list your operational procedures to make sure that people are not having bare hand contact with food. So, we had gloves here in this picture. So what are you doing? Doesn't have to be gloves, but make sure that there's not bare hand contact with the food. What you're doing to make sure that you're keeping raw foods and ready to eat foods separate is important. So how are you keeping your raw meat separate from your vegetables that might be raw? So then cleaning and sanitizing procedures have to be listed as well. And then again, in your HACCP plan, you need to have your document your procedures that you're using to restrict access to the reduced oxygen packaging equipment to responsible trained personnel. You don't want just anybody using it, because you want to make sure that they're using it safely, and that they're, that the food that is going to be in there is going to be safe. And then just again, documenting in your HACCP plan what training programs you're using to ensure that the person responsible for the reduced oxygen packaging understands these safety precautions. So that's very important as well. So a few useful resources listed here. So the FDA food code, the 2022 food code is available for download there as listed on that website. There's some other good a publication about seafood from the University of Florida that's listed there. Reduced oxygen packaging and seafood is really helpful. Here's that reference that I mentioned of the pH of many different foods from Oklahoma State that might be helpful. And then there's some information on water activity. If you would like to learn more about water activity, there's a good publication from Clemson University listed there. So here's my contact information. If you have questions, our websites are listed there too, both on the K-State and University of Missouri side. If you have questions about this, again, I'll zoom back up to it. There's the fact sheet that has more information and this information that was covered today. So you can Google that and find that information as well. So thanks very much, and have a good day.